today. Thank you, Lana.
Awesome. Thanks, Gail. And hello, everyone. I'm seeing some familiar names and faces, so I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for coming to hear this. I'll share my screen. I've got a few slides to go through that hopefully will help guide the conversation a bit. But yeah, as I said, very happy to take questions throughout. This is meant to be pretty casual. And I'll talk a little bit first about Areto Labs, about the company and the product and kind of what we're building, and then also have some slides on more specifically on the machine learning work that we're currently doing. Just a general caveat that I am a non-technical co-founder and I don't have formal education in computer science. My background is I did a degree in English literature and music, and then a master's degree in journalism. And my career has been kind of communications, marketing, and then product and program management and consulting before I founded Areto Labs as an entrepreneur. So just FYI, I might try to talk about things I don't understand and you can feel free to correct me. So just making sure, maybe I'll look at Gail for a thumbs up. You can see my screen and everything looks good. Okay, great. So Areto Labs is a B2B SaaS social enterprise tech company. We're headquartered in Edmonton. As Gail mentioned, we have team members across Canada and in fact, working from a number of different countries around the world. So time zones are our biggest problem these days, but we're making it work. And it's been interesting to really build a company during COVID because that's really dictated and directed how we've been able to organize ourselves. So we're mostly a remote company at this point. We don't have a physical office anywhere right now. That might change as we kind of emerge and reorganize, but that's us. And our product focus is that we build apps for digital workspaces that link sentiment analysis with automated prompts and nudges. So I'll get more into that later. And our mission is to make digital communities more positive and inclusive. So I've included a picture of a scone and a cup of coffee in the top right corner of this screen to remind me to tell our origin story a little bit. So one of my co-founders, Casey Machin, and I met about 7 or 8 years ago as we were connected to volunteer together to work towards gender equality in politics. And we co-founded a nonprofit organization called ParityBot, which Casey is still the chair of. And while we were working on that endeavor, we often would just, spend 3 mornings a week or so sitting down, having coffee one-on-one with women thinking about running for office or who were already in politics or had been in politics. And so District Cafe in Edmonton on Jasper, or I guess it's 100th Avenue and 109th Street kind of became like my second office. And the raspberry white chocolate scone became my favorite treat. Good thing I rode my bike there every day and back. But I would sit down and have coffee with women and we would hear about, their different experiences. We would try to ask them multiple times to run for office. That was kind of our big strategy to get more women thinking about this. And they would explain different reasons, why it might not work for them and what the barriers were. And as we learned more about that, we would learn about how to build our programming at our nonprofit organization. But more and more, one of the things that came up over and over again was the problem of social media, particularly Twitter, and just the barrier faced by women, especially thinking about how they were going to face and deal with all the toxicity on Twitter. And it was becoming more of a well-known problem at this point as well. And so with this in the back of my mind, meanwhile, my day job, I was working at a bank at ATB Financial. And one of the teams I was working on submitted a paper to the NeurIPS, Neural Information Processing Systems, it was the 2018 conference, I believe, in Montreal, to the AI and financial services I think it was a fairness and transparency workshop kind of themed around that area. And I was sort of selected to go represent the group and the paper that we had submitted. And I believe Matt was there. I remember sitting next to Matt, and he's here in this room, so I got to shout him out. Anyway, I went and read this paper. Being a non-technical person, I was pretty nervous, but I had been given lots of good notes. And at the conference that year, the workshop next door was the AI for Social Good workshop. And so I wandered in and I kind of thought, yep, this is the room for me. This is definitely right up my alley. Encountered some great work done by Element AI in combination with Amnesty International. They had done a big study on women in politics and journalism and Twitter, and using AI to measure the sentiment essentially of tweets sent to women in public roles, particularly in politics and journalism. So being an advocate for women in politics, having a background in journalism myself, I thought this is it. This is something big. And a few weeks later, I was sitting on the beach in Mexico on holiday over the winter holidays, thinking, hey, I wonder if we could create a bot that detects toxic tweets sent to women in politics and then posts a positive tweet automatically for every negative one it detects. So that's kind of the origin story of how Casey and I, co-founding our Women in Politics nonprofit organization, evolved into building a piece of technology that addressed a problem in this world that then spawned into a broader mission, which is now at the core of Areto Labs. So that's our origin story. And the broader theme in the world that's happening right now that kind of underlies this problem is that life and work are increasingly digital. And especially this year, this has become true for all of us. We're engaging online and digital communities more than ever before. And digital communities shape our culture, and it's not always pretty. Digital communities are becoming the new public square. And for people who feel that the sentiment in these digital communities is a barrier to their participation, this is a problem for how we shape our entire culture and world. And so we are looking at this problem at a very broad level, thinking, how can we solve this through the mechanisms of entrepreneurship? So this is too much to read on a slide. I'll just, I'll tell you a little bit about it and give a quick overview, but this essentially starts to drill down into the two verticals, I guess, that we're thinking about at our company. So on the left-hand side addresses what a cost it is to businesses for having negative cultures. And especially now businesses are creating their cultures online more and more. And this having negative cultures online results in more talent churn, higher absenteeism, more accidents, more errors. The costs of negative cultures are well proven in business, and the benefits of positive cultures are also well documented, a huge part of having a successful company. And then kind of on the other side there, we look at when social media becomes a workplace. So it sort of kind of turns the whole idea inside out. And we think of, women in journalism, in politics, in sports, influencers, 85% of influencers are women. The social media is becoming a workplace for a lot of different professions. And women, especially women of color, marginalized communities, essentially equity-seeking communities historically have been more targeted by toxic tweets and suffered in greater proportion. So this is kind of the slightly more specific problem that we're solving. And we're solving this with essentially a fundamental design that underlines apps that we deploy inside digital communities. So this slide here kind of represents the high level design of the app we're building. So we essentially combine almost like a front end and a back end. So the front end is a system of automated culture prompts in digital communities that are meant to build empathy and prevent bad actions. The back end is where our machine learning work comes in. So NLP to perform sentiment analysis, which measures engagement and displays trends and nudges positivity. And then those two systems working together drive pro-social behavior and build inclusion in digital communities. So this is sort of our way of saying, we've stumbled into this solution that can create more positive cultures without necessarily taking away or encroaching on the whole issue of free speech, which is something that we come across often. And this can be really useful, not just for businesses, but for organizations who are looking to protect a workforce that has to engage in the public in some way. So our first iteration of taking this design and kind of building an app around it and deploying it into a digital community is called Coach. Coach is our product that we currently have on Slack. And it like today of all days, it's just been published in the Slack app directory. So next week you should be able to find it. If you're curious, I can send you a link. And it posts behavioral prompts and measures culture through sentiment analysis. So you can kind of see some displays here of what it looks like to invite Coach into your Slack channel and have it post prompts for people to reply to. The whole idea is that you start to learn more about your team. Team members have the opportunity to share stories and tell the rest of the team more about themselves. And this, bit by bit, like the flap of a butterfly wing, creating big waves over time, helps build empathy and inclusion. And then our back-end analysis system helps leaders and community managers sort of see what's going on in their communities at a broader trend level. So we haven't explicitly haven't wanted to tackle this at an individual level. This is more a team culture level. So the data we collect and analyze is aggregated and anonymized. But we show engagement scores, sentiment scores. We start to show which different Coach posts are being more engaged with. And essentially over time, it should show you how your culture is improving in your digital community or team environment. And then the original, back to sort of the origin story here, ParityBot, which we've kind of taken a level up now and called ProBot, as we're looking to apply the design of ParityBot, not just to women in politics, but journalism and women in sports lately, especially. ParityBot lives on Twitter right now. So it's sort of the external social media version of taking our app design and building it into a Twitter bot. It posts a positive tweet for every negative tweet it detects. It follows a list of Twitter handles. In the case of ParityBot, it would be a list of women politicians maybe running in a certain election or who are elected in a certain jurisdiction, and displays information on a back-end dashboard as well. So a count of the number of tweets that were above a certain threshold of toxicity. I won't get too deep into it. I can answer questions about that later if you're curious, but that's kind of the basic design of ParityBot or ProBot. Now, that concludes the sort of first half of my explanation about Areto Labs and who we are as a business and the types of products we're building. Next, I'm going to get into things I am less of an expert in, but I did want to share this with this group in particular, so you'll have to be patient with me and please feel free to ask questions. But maybe I'll just take a short pause here in case there are any questions, so you don't feel like you're interrupting me. I'll just kind of leave a few seconds of silence here. Feel free to pop in with questions if you have them.
I don't see any questions in the chat. So if anyone does have some, if you put it in the chat, then I can nudge Lana to stop. But please do continue.
Perfect. Okay, great. Okay, so this next set of slides was actually originally designed by my co-founder, Jackie, who's a much better slide designer than I am. So this will be nicer to look at, I'm sure. But this is some of the work we've been doing with natural language processing and using some methods here to detect microaggressions in text. So we've been using so far something called Perspective API for our work and our products. I'm not sure, there might be some of you who are familiar with it, but it's a tool out of a company called Jigsaw, which is part of the Alphabet family. And it detects specifically sort of the sentiment family around toxicity. So it shows us prediction scores around toxicity, abusive language, identity attacks, racism, sexism, things like that. So it's been really well suited to the use case that we're working on. But as we started to build Areto Labs and think about our products more and more, we heard some feedback around, hey, it'd be really cool to get a more nuanced understanding of text using machine learning. And we thought, isn't that what everybody wants? But let's give it a try. And so we've started experimenting with surfacing microaggressions in text. So I'll go through just a little bit of an explanation around what that's looked like so far for us here. So what are microaggressions, you might imagine? Why do we care? So they are essentially sentences that you might hear of that sort of subtly suggest bias in some way. So they're not overtly toxic. They're not like overtly clearly offensive. But even something like asking someone, where are you from, when you might not ask that of everybody in a certain context, can be considered a microaggression. So we started hearing from companies that we were doing market research interviews with that this was something that they were looking at kind of within their company, thinking about how they could teach people about what these are and sort of understand better how they're surfacing in their workplace. And so that's partly why we decided to care about it. But also, it's almost like the reverse of what I described with Coach, with what we're doing with Coach. So the underlying idea behind our Coach product is that we're posting messages that people can engage with and get to know each other on a positive level. And so those small sort of micro connection moments add up over time to build positivity and inclusivity. It's sort of the opposite with microaggressions. You know, those sort of seemingly small one-off, you know, was that, I don't know how I feel about that. They build up over time to create exclusive environments. And when we're looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion in our society, this is a big problem, especially when you look at the impact over time. So it's essentially what we're trying to build is subtle acts of inclusion, and microaggressions represent subtle acts of exclusion. And of course, I don't need to tell most of you this, I'm sure, but this is a tricky problem because of context. So, for example, nice dress. A friend tells you you're wearing a lovely dress, you're flattered, that's fine. A stranger yells, nice dress at you as he drives by in his speeding car. You're embarrassed, self-conscious, and scared. I can relate to that latter example. I don't know if some of you can as well, but this is tricky because it obviously there's a lot of subtle context going on in something like this, and this is why this is such a hard problem to solve with the machine learning technology that we currently have access to. So our research question was, how might we use NLP to surface microaggressions in text? And skipping lots of more details about this, I just went right to our results. So we use data sets from our own work with ParityBot so far. We had run ParityBot in elections in Canada, the United States, and New Zealand. So we had a good data set of tweets at this point. We use the RT gender data sets, self-MA, and Jigsaw toxic comments. And we experimented with supervised learning, weak supervision, and unsupervised learning in a few different ways. So you can kind of see the different categories along the x-axis along the bottom here. And we found that supervised learning using the BERT language model and weakly supervised learning models using the ULM fit worked the best for us. So these are the precision scores for surfacing microaggressions, and then these are the F1 scores. You can probably hear the hesitancy in my voice here as I'm entering into territory I don't know enough about to really be presenting it, but I did want to share with you, in case this was interesting in your work, something about what we were working on here. We've got some team members working on this who are much better at this than I am. And I thought I'd also mention kind of where we got stuck and what are our next steps in this particular area of work. So things that we still need help on, things we're kind of stuck on. This is kind of where we're at right now. For a small number of data sets, weak supervision cannot do as good a job as supervised learning does, so it might overfit. And in weak supervision, BERT has a higher validation loss than other algorithms, which means it has a lower validation accuracy score. And label model accuracy depends on data shuffling, which could be generated by an insufficient data set. So at a high level, we're looking at how different models perform with the data sets that are available to us, and how much labeling we can do and should do with our resources, and then how that has an impact on how well these models perform. And of course, our I don't know, did I include a slide here? No. Our sort of test data set is also quite limited and really tricky. Like we're kind of testing on a too small a data set. So that's been tricky for us as well. And then some of the things we're currently experimenting with or plan to look into. The first thing is transformers. Next is building our own data set and making a plan to use it to train a model. So we're continuing to deploy our products, which also kind of helps us continue to improve our machine learning work, there's lots of work to do there. We need to better understand the current state of the field and learn from others' attempts, successes, and failures. So we have done a bit of a survey of the literature in terms of who else has done and published some work on detecting microaggressions, but there's more we can do here. And I think probably, less reading and more phone calling and talking to some of the people who are currently working on this problem, and seeing if they'll share with us, what they've learned and how they're doing. And asking experts for help and bringing in researchers to our lab to help. So this is sort of we're hiring shout out. We're looking at working with a few grad students who might be interested in working with us, potentially through the MyTax program. I wanted to mention that in case anyone is familiar with it and kind of knows about it. But as an early stage startup, we are deeply, deeply grateful and very lucky to have accessed programs like the First Jobs program and like the NRC IRAP program for funding to work with talent. It has been make or break for us as a company, and we have accessed some truly wonderfully talented students and employees, and we're a great place to work. So we're continually looking for people who are really interested in our cause and what we're doing, and think that it could be an interesting place for them to potentially forward some of the research they're interested in, as well as help forward some of the research we're working on. And then ultimately, what we'd love to do is, get some a model to a point where we're confident in deploying it as an experimental feature into our products. And this for me is really like a very deeply exciting piece of what we're doing, because for many reasons, but recently I read a book called The Alignment Problem by Brian Christian. And if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It, for me, is a nice intersection around deploying AI and machine learning into many different fields, and what that means and what the consequences are, how important it is to consider bias, fairness, explainability, accountability in this work and what we're doing. And so for me, in this particular context, thinking about building a model that can detect microaggressions, like, what does that mean, and how do we communicate that to people? How do we communicate that to our customers to help them truly understand what these numbers and what this machine learning system is actually telling them? How do we do that honestly? How do we make sure we explain that properly? And that's just a fun problem in my mind, and almost an equally interesting problem for me to unlock. Building the model to a point where it's doing something interesting and validating that, and then communicating that to our customers, and bringing this research and science into something that we are deploying into the world to try to make the world better, is just, that's why I'm doing this whole thing. So those are some of our next steps. And I believe that is the end of my formal presentation. So thanks everyone for listening, and yeah, happy to take questions or talk about more things or anything.
Excellent. Thanks, Lana. If you can turn off the presentation mode. I see a couple of questions in the chat. And first, where did the name Areto Labs come from?
Great question. A bit of a story there. So we had created ParityBot, deployed it in Canada for 2 elections, for the Alberta provincial election in 2019 in the spring, and then in the Canadian federal election in the fall of 2019. We wrote about the system and our experiments, I guess, and the results in a paper, and we had it published and accepted to NeurIPS 2019 in the AI for Social Good workshop there, which was really exciting. And then from there, I just kind of made some connections out of that workshop and talked to a few other people. Momentum was building, and I was thinking, hey, I think I might have an opportunity to go to New York and speak at the UN Women Conference in March of 2020. Guess what else happened in March of 2020?
Mm.
The world shut down. But meanwhile, I was scrambling to kind of figure out, like, I've got a tool called ParityBot, but it's not really connected to anything. It was sort of an adjacent project to the nonprofit that we were running at the time. And so I thought, if this momentum keeps building, we could probably create a company or a social enterprise out of this work. And so the rest is history, as you've seen. But I was sitting at my kitchen table thinking, like, I need a name for this company. And I was just asking friends and smart people who know how to name things. And someone suggested something like Virtue. And I thought that was cool, but it was taken. And so I just kind of leapt from there and did some Googling around different words that mean different things. And Areto, the sort of root of that word is aret or arete, and it's a Greek word that just generally means like virtue and goodness. And so I just added an O on the end and came up with a company name that most people don't intuitively know how to pronounce, which is like Startup 101, not something not to do. So it is what it is. We'll
They
see
don't
what
go
happens.
too far wrong though, so excellent. So there's two other questions. One you may have already covered it, talking about how much data and do you have for training a deep learning model, or do you use?
From the data that we've collected through some of the work we've done so far, we have a data set of about probably like 12 million and a handful of tweets. So that's mostly through our ParityBot work. So that's the first bit. And then we've also been able to access other data sets that are pre-existing. So for example, RT gender is like a published data set that we were able to get permission to use, and it helped us start to train our model. But other than that, we're looking into kind of where we go next with that. So we'll see. But it's funny. It's like it's all about the data, isn't it? At the end of the day.
Yes. But people can help with that, which is a good thing. Dustin, you have a longer question. Do you want to deliver it in person? In the meantime, Lana, you can read it on the side. But go ahead, Dustin.
Sure. Hi there. Thanks for the talk. So I've got a couple questions about the products from the first section. So one is Coach targeted to teams already struggling with toxicity, or more for ones looking, for something like a preventative measure?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. I would say currently it's the latter, for teams looking for something as a preventative measure, but it could be applied to both. And the only reason I say the latter right now is because of where we're at as a company. So we're still relatively early stage and looking at like our early adopter market. Like, everyone could use Coach, but like, who's it going to be first? And really trying to focus on a narrow customer segment is what we're looking at. So typically that tends to be people who are, a lot of different characteristics, but I would say more towards the preventative side of things. We have talked to a number of companies who are like currently dealing with, active toxicity in digital communities. I find they tend to be bigger companies. And so with Coach at the stage it's at right now, it's more of a like SME, like small to medium sized enterprise product. But we are looking at building out the features and the different kind of configurations of how it works, long story short, to be more appropriate for like an enterprise size company. So like a 5,000 team member company that might want to have Coach in, a number of different channels in Slack, for example, and have a way to kind of handle that and deal with that.
Okay, thanks. And just to follow up, do you have evidence about how effective Coach is, and how, do you try to measure how effective it is in terms of reducing team toxicity?
Yeah, great question. So few different ways to answer that. So early on with ParityBot, kind of like taking a step back from Coach and ParityBot and getting back to that like I guess, underlying or overarching like product design. So sort of the positive interventions combined with the measurement piece and kind of how they sort of circle each other. I was really curious about this first before we even started Areto Labs. So we worked with a grad student at the U of T who was studying UX research, and asked her to talk to some of the women in politics who would have been, I guess, targeted by ParityBot, or who we were targeting to improve their experience in politics with ParityBot. She did mostly qualitative research with those women. So we were encouraged enough to keep going, but knew we probably had more to do. And then when we developed Coach, we did a lot of research into some existing studies. So things like behavioral science, using nudges in different ways, lots of research into building team cultures in companies, the importance of storytelling. I had some background in that personally as well from my own career. So there was that research piece. And then we're still very curious about this and would love to be able to kind of point to a big research project that we've done. So we've applied for a grant through Heritage Canada to do some more research on like the concept of perceived safety in digital communities and how our system might impact that and hopefully improve it, I guess would be our hypothesis. So yes, and then in terms of kind of like measuring effectiveness and deploying these systems in digital communities and measuring the ongoing like if they have an ongoing effect, that's also kind of we're hoping, we're still, I'd say, relatively early, so I don't want to draw any conclusions, and I don't think we have enough data really to do that. But partly the cool part about having this front end and then having the back end is that, yeah, the back end helps you start to measure your team culture and sentiment right away, but then theoretically over time you could start to potentially maybe correlate Coach being in your channels and watching some of the sentiment and engagement change or improve over time as well. So yeah, as we work with more and more partners and customers and gather more data, and we'll definitely be dedicating a lot of our like research part of our company to learning more about that too.
Excellent. We have 2 questions in the chat, and Matt has his hands up. And one thing that I would ask that you put in the chat, Lana, is an answer to this question. How should people apply to work at Areto Labs? What skill sets are you looking for? And is there an email address you can share? Lana,
yes.
Thank you.
Yes, totally. Yeah, Lana@aretolabs.com goes right to me. And we don't really have a formal job posting right now or a formal application process. So, but I highly encourage anyone who's interested, don't hesitate to email me. I'd love to hear from you. A wide open invitation and welcome for that. And skill sets we're looking for. So we've kind of got 3 like big chunks of work going on right now. Like any tech company, we've got a development team, a tech development team, like software engineering and development. And then we have a sales and marketing team as well. And we also have this sort of third cool spot, which is our research lab. So that would involve potentially some of the folks in this group, machine learning and computer science researchers, research scientists, especially in that natural language processing area. But like, we're the type of company who's really eager to work with people who are passionate about what we're doing and who are really interested in learning. So for example, we're working with a PhD student right now who we met through the First Jobs program, who's working on her PhD in geophysics, and she's done a ton of learning about NLP and machine learning. So she's been great. So, don't worry about fitting exactly to the job description. And yeah, and I think that the research stuff, like it's going to be interesting. We're in a really critical point in our company where we're striving to reach a sales goal, to be honest, and that's going to help us, I think, kind of unlock a level of growth potential. So the research team, we're also looking for probably some social scientist researchers as well. I'm less certain about that, but I'd love to hear from you if that's who you are and you're interested in it.
Excellent. And you've mentioned the First Jobs program a couple of times, and thank you for that. That's Technology Alberta's First Jobs program, where FIRST stands for First Industry Research Science Technology Company Job. And the idea for that program actually came from the AI professors and some other people in industry on the need for these brilliant students to get their first job with a local company can really help grow the companies, our economy, and be of value to the students. So with that, so glad to hear that your past student is still connected with you. Fantastic. And it does look like you take a page out of Google's book, where I know when they hire many from many areas, not only computer science, but all people with passion, right? So you are off to a great start. Matt, I see your hand up, so patiently, please do ask the question.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for the talk, Lana. When this works, it's going to be hugely impactful. I have a two-part question that I think is actually the two parts are related. So thinking about Twitter, it seems like you might, if you were to engage with the people, there might be a difference between how you engage with at big angry white guy versus how you would engage with someone that has a verified Jason Kenny handle. Similarly, on the internal side, there are some people who would really appreciate being told if they did something that could be a microaggression versus other people who might think EDI is not worth even talking about. So have you had a chance to think about how the audience or the individuals might influence the way your AI could act?
Cool question, Matt. And I just love that. Lots to think about there. And a few layers of answers, and maybe starting with the last one first. So have we thought about how the AI might like adjust to how people might react is like cool, really cool, and kind of, but not really. So I'm going to write that down immediately and think more about that in my dreams. And then the other piece, though, that you bring up is super interesting and something we've really, really thought about and like wrestled with in a lot of ways, because with the way ParityBot is currently designed, and we've sort of, in lots of different like potential customers or partners that we've talked to, we've emphasized that design decisions can be changed, but the way that we've designed it and deployed it so far has been really focused on like, I guess you would say almost the victims. So like we've been focused on the people who tend to suffer, I guess, from the toxicity on Twitter. So we haven't necessarily always tagged them and their handles in the positive tweets, but we did during the New Zealand election. So we would post positive tweets with no tags, and we would post some of them with actual like at, Erica Harvey MP in New Zealand, and got some interesting feedback that way. We tried to do it in the US as well, but Twitter got mad at us because the volume was too high. And it was just a more prominent market, I think. So we've really debated around like, how do we kind of treat these two groups of people, like the group of people that we're trying to impact and make a more positive experience for, and the group of people who are kind of the perpetrators and the different characteristics they have, as you outline, like some who might not know that they're saying something offensive and they might want to know, all the way to genuine trolls who know exactly how offensive they're being, and it's their right to do that on Twitter. And how do different people react to different types of interventions, and there's more work to do there, I think, and kind of mapping those and thinking through it. And yeah, that's like, I love that question because it's one of the fun parts for me, the design of the system and the different ways that might work for different groups of people.
Very cool. Thank you.
Very cool, because I can see that there's, someone's great uncle may not understand what he's saying isn't
He's an uncle.
And if he had that filter, or at least that prompt to say, did you really mean to say, or you could say it that way, that would be wonderful. All right, so there's like 3 or 4 questions, and I know we only have 10 minutes or so left. So from Marjan, there is, thanks for the talk. What tools do you use to process that big data?
Yeah, good question. We kind of have like a stack of tools for processing, and like just at the very basic level, we work with Google Cloud Platform and Elasticsearch as our sort of processor and database, if that's helpful. And Elasticsearch is connected to a tool called Kibana that helps us visualize the data. So that's been really useful. And then like the AI processing system is Perspective API right now. And then our experimental model as well, we've been kind of looking at. So at a high level, those are the tools we use right now.
Excellent. And then from Roshan, Roshan, did you want to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. I can quickly just phrase what I said. So like with a lot of these online automated tools, you kind of hear like when they become more prevalent, people kind of learn to work around them. Like they'll change their language in such a way that they don't trigger the tool, but like people understand what's going on. And like when your system becomes more popular, I guess the workplace version of it, do you have any thoughts on this and how you might work around it?
Totally. Yeah. And there's a similar question like that that asks, are there predefined words or certain words that are sensitive? And it kind of relates in my mind because the tools, the way that we've seen the tools work so far, they're very sensitive to curse words and swear words. So even if it's ultimately a positive feeling, like you're so effing great, it'll register as very toxic. And I know that the models are trying to keep up with that and they've made some adjustments based on that, but it's still, there's like, you know, these interesting biases, I guess, in that way for those certain words to be like so sort of, I guess, prominent in the data, probably in a certain way that they tend to skew the system. And then, yeah, it's a good point that people tend to, and we've seen this in the data too, like every now and then we'll go through and just scroll through some tweets and pull a data set for people who are interested in the different ways that this system is working, and seeing the creativity from people and like how they sort of already tend to almost get around some of this stuff is really interesting. And I think like I have no idea what we're going to do about that, but it feels like part of the context problem that we are aware of too when we're looking at microaggressions as well. So yeah, and like I would say too that the approach that we've taken to sort of deploying this type of tool in the wild has been so far kind of on a, not necessarily on an individual level, but more on that aggregated like cultural level. And that's helped us, I think, get around the almost the prediction problems and the inconsistencies in the prediction at that individual level. And I sort of think about it as like a coin toss. Like if you toss a coin once, it's 50-50. You don't know which way it's going to predict heads or tails, but at a high level, 1,000 of them, you can probably say more. I don't know. So that to me is like, you know, at the individual level, it's trickier than at the cultural level. So that's another way that we've designed the product to get around it.
Russ, Professor Russ Griner has a question.
Thank you. Great talk, very interesting discussion. Now, you designed a tool for good to try to find negative things and respond to them. I'm sure there are people who are doing the opposite, who are saying, oh, wait, there was a lot of good stuff about this person, let's be nasty. Could you imagine a war escalating between your for good bot and their for nasty bots? And I mean, I'm not sure you can do anything about it, but I just want to just pose that question for something to think about.
Yes. First of all, congratulations on your recent award, Dr. Griner. Good to see you. And yes, this has come up before. Actually, my cousin brought this up on Facebook about a year ago. I remember specifically, and I like, you know, I have thought about that, and I sort of wonder often myself, like, are we, you know, is this the beginning of AI warfare in some ways? Like we picture these actual humanoid robots like tramping down a field in this unified way, but like, is it actually going to be more like kind of what we're embarking on now, where there are sort of, you know, we hear about like things like bot farms and troll farms and, you know, all these countries, and are we going to now just be the opposite of that? And I think like, honestly, yeah, maybe. And this is the this is the interesting piece, because then I think, is that a place I want to be in? Like, is that a game that I want to play as an entrepreneur? And I've been listening to a book by Simon Sinek on my morning runs, an audio book called The Infinite Game. I think it's one of his new ones, and it's like he kind of gets at this, like, you know, if this is what this becomes, what do we do with Areto Labs? You know, like, if we start to see that we've created a monster of some kind, do we pivot away? And like, probably that's, you know, for me, it's an interesting philosophical way to think about how to build a business, and the purpose of what we're doing is really important. So, you know, it's a important question that I don't have a good answer to.
By the way, 2 weeks ago at the AI summit, I was by Devika Subramanian, who has a tool to try to detect which Twitter messages are from bots and try to counteract that. So, Sabrina, is that available online right now? We talked from 2 weeks ago.
Can I say that again, Russ?
Is Devika Subramanian's talk from 2 weeks ago? Is that available now to be viewed?
I believe so. I think Amy's posted it. I'll just double check, but if it's not up now, it will be up within the next few days or so.
So again, she wasn't thinking about, she was thinking about just detecting it. I like your approach to doing something about it, right? But it might be just touching base and seeing what she's done and seeing how it relates to it. Yeah. Again, excellent talk.
That's
and
a great idea.
I like the direction you're going in. But definitely look
Thanks.
at Devika's work.
I can see us, you know, Technology Alberta, where we have a community and there are forums, and you can't, you know, you have a facilitator on a forum that's currently a person, but 24/7 are forums, right? And so to have a bot that's actually helping you ensure that there's a community being built versus decimated. You know, and if there was a war of the bots, and you could actually measure the negativity amplifying, for that to put a communication channel on hold, or I would like that, right? So I don't need either bot to win. I just need the negativity to stop. And I think your solution would help us detect that in a way. So
interesting. Cool. I love that. Love that.
So I see people are leaving because our time is up. And in fact, I think 12:50 is probably more of a university time where it is up. It's 12:55. So we have a couple of additional questions that we can take. Oh, and I see a link to that presentation that Russ had mentioned. So we can take the questions. And I thank everyone for joining us today. And as Sabina said, there's if people want to stay and talk with Lana, they can.
Okay.
Not
Gail,
only
there is one anonymous question in the chat box, so I can
go ahead.
Read that one. So Lena, this is a question for you. I have a question about how your system works around free speech. I understand that microaggressions can be subtle. Sometimes a comment can be interpreted as a microaggression by one person, but not by another. How does your system handle this subjectivity or ambiguity without jeopardizing free speech or making people worried about saying anything that may be interpreted as a microaggression?
Oh, great question. And this is so fundamental to what we're doing. So thank you for the question. Again, a layer of answers. And at the end of it, I don't have the perfect answer, I'm sure. But so one thing that we like about our system is that it's not about blocking. It's not about canceling. It's not I don't mean to use the word cancel in a provocative way, but it's more about like adding consequences. And so I, you know, as someone with a real interest in politics and the law, I really think about free speech a lot and think about, you know, how our system is fitting into that world and protecting this important value, especially in our Canadian and really in a democratic culture. And so we kind of see our system as, you know, providing a consequence to hate speech, but also preserving an element of free speech. And those two things are in constant, you know, balance. And So that's kind of how I see what we're doing. And then with microaggressions in particular, it is difficult. And so we've sort of thought, okay, how do we create with the front end of our system a culture of listening and sharing and understanding and empathizing, so that when someone maybe posts something that someone else might interpret as a microaggression, there's already a culture created in a space where that conversation can happen, where there's that openness and understanding. And that's kind of what the ongoing posts of Coach create in a world where we sort of think, ultimately it's interesting to be able to measure those, but like really there's this human element of communication and conversation and being able to have a talk about that. I'm absolutely someone who has said things that I think would be considered microaggressions in the past, and I have an ongoing personal project of trying to learn more about how I can speak in an inclusive way in my community building efforts. And we kind of hope that this ultimately helps people get there in a way that ultimately just creates space for that conversation is what it is. So I hope that helps.
All right, so it's 1 o'clock. Russ, I'll take any lead.
Just a quick comment. I'm doing a capstone project class, and I look for people from outside to suggest projects for students to work on. So if I get your email, I'll be sure to include you in a list of people that are invited. It's winter, so it will be not this coming semester, but sometime in January. But you said Lana at aretolabs.com.
That's right. It's in the chat. Yeah, and you got it. Yes. The chat's really scrolled, so that's awesome.
Thank you very much. Great presentation. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Niraj. Thank you, Justin, for helping coordinate. Next month, we have Dark Host Analytics on our company showcase. So looking forward to seeing everyone at that time.
Sure. Thank you, Lena, for a great presentation and wonderful discussion. If anyone wants to get in touch with Lena, her email is in the chat box. Please copy that and feel free to reach out to her. And we will meet next time. Thank you, Gail. Thank you, Lena, for today's session. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for having me.